We had a big day yesterday. There'll always be transition difficulty, but we had in history, it was the biggest day in history, the markets. So we're very happy with the way the country's running.
The president made a big show of inviting cameras into the cabinet meeting, while the secretaries cooed about how well things were going.
We're getting the respect we deserve now, and I think you're going to see historic deals, one after the other.
I think it's going to work out really very well.
But while Trump's pause had quelled the markets yesterday, today he upped the ante on his trade war with China, and shares and bonds slid heavily back into the red.
Wall Street is opening now with a negative sign. The uncertainty is extremely high, extremely high.
Tariffs against China, which have been stepped up from 20% to 54% to 104%, were today hiked again to 145%.
If they insist on pursuing a tariff war, China will respond in kind and fight till the end. Pressure, threats or blackmail are not the right way to deal with China.
Nobody knows where this is going to end up, and anyone that tells you they know where it's going to end up is being disingenuous. A lot of this has to do with the whims of one person. It just so happens that that person's the most powerful person in the world and resides in the White House.
In the city, anxieties were still high as bond prices surged and share prices tumbled.
The impact of uncertainty is potentially enormous. It's the type of thing that economists don't really have the tools to deal with. We don't have the models to deal with this element of human behavior. But if you think about the multitude of companies that are pausing investment decisions, they're pausing hiring decisions, all of that feeds the sense of uncertainty and then stasis.
On Capitol Hill, House Republicans passed a budget bill they claim will usher in massive tax and spending cuts, with the Speaker telling journalists Trump was right to pause the unilateral tariffs.
We know that markets have been a little unstable. They want to know that Congress is on the job, and I'm here to tell you that we are.
While the EU suspended its steel and aluminium retaliation against the US for 90 days, there was still a lack of clarity about how these trade fears would be de-escalated.
I think no one trusts any more US trade policy, if we want to limit to the trade policy. So I think governments will still go there and try to negotiate. I'm not sure they will get big deals. And even if the deal is reached, it's unclear for how long it can last.
Nobody wins in a trade war. Between them, the US and China account for over 1/3 of global GDP. But we still have the world's two major economic superpowers going at each other over trade. And that will have repercussions for everyone.
Here's how the superpowers measure up. US GDP is $25.5 trillion against China's $18 trillion. But when you focus on wealth per head, the US is way in front. In China, it's under $12,500. In the US, it's more than 6 times that amount at under $83,000. But look at how fast these economies are growing, and you can see why the US feels nervous. Not to mention China's control of rare earth minerals, its tech advances, as well as its weapons stockpiling. The US dollar is falling, debt is climbing, and shares in all American companies like Nike, Goldman Sachs and Chevron are all in sell-off territory again. If this is certainty, it's not yet being felt in financial markets.
Haley Ebrahimi. Well, in a moment, I'll be speaking to a former Obama administration official and a Republican strategist. But first, Kathy spoke to Victor Gao earlier from the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing and the former translator for the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. She asked him first if he thought the US had successfully managed to isolate China.
I think the United States, in launching such a global trade war or tariff war, is doing the wrong thing. It has not only significantly eroded the living standards and the quality of life for the American people, it has caused a disruption in the stock market, in the bond market, and the complete disregard for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of so many countries in the world.
The problem is, though, that the rest of the world is now scrambling to do deals with the US. Some of those are quite close to being signed, according to America. So where does that leave China?
Well, if you hold a gun at the head of anyone, most people will panic and will be desperate and probably will do what you command or dictate for them to do. But whether they are willing to do that, whether they really respect your authority or control, that's another thing.
But the problem is that in this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun. And so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? You know, it can't sustain the loss of 15% of its export market, i.e. what you export to the US.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. Right. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
I mean, I wonder how aggressive China might be in trying to peel away the EU, the UK, Australia, peel these countries away from their deals with the US.
We do not want to separate other countries from each other, but it is true that EU is talking to China. The voices I picked up here in Beijing is that EU leaders and Chinese leaders are having phone calls, exchange of delegations. We're talking about the possibility of signing up the comprehensive agreement of investment or even leading towards a free trade agreement between China and EU eventually.
When you hear Donald Trump say China wants a deal, it just doesn't know how to go about it. They're proud people. J.D. Vance talks about Chinese peasants. What do you make of their conduct in this respect?
If J.D. Vance thinks that he's dealing with the peasants in China, and I'm proud to be a descendant of the peasants. Most of us are descendants of the peasants anyway. That's our tradition. We are farmers before, but now we are one of the leading industrialized economies in the world. So I'm sorry, J.D. Vance doesn't know what he's talking about. And therefore, I don't think there will be China-US dialogue unless the United States changes its attitude towards China. Deal with China as it is, show respect to China, show respect to the Chinese people, and don't try to impose your prejudice and biased view about China or about the rest of the world. We will not buy that kind of prejudice or discrimination from the United States. No, we will never buy that story.
To hear you talk and to hear Donald Trump talk, it seems very clear that there's not going to be any deal anytime soon unless someone alters their stance. Doesn't that then mean global recession and really misery for many people around the world?
Well, my concern is that if China and the United States do not take major measures to correct all these tariff war or trade war launched by the United States, we will have a recession. President Trump needs to realize that Rome is not built overnight. To talk about millions of manufacturing jobs going back to the United States, relying on tariff is a futile attempt.
You think the American people will rise up?
Well, there will be the midterm election next year. And whether the American people will vote with their feet, I do not know. And there will be a general election, presidential election in 2028. Results will be known in 2029. If you follow the American political rhythm, no party has a complete permanent lock on power.
Well,
and
unlike
we all
in China,
need to prepare for changes. Well, in China, we have stability. We have stability, predictability, certainty. We always say we have a plan for the coming 100 years for peace and stability and development.
Victor Gao, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor.
Well, I'm now joined by Peter Loge, a former Obama administration official, and Republican strategist Lance Trover. Thanks very much to both of you for coming on. Peter, let me start with you. I mean, President Biden, before that, President Obama, everyone has been saying we've got to deal with the Chinese. And of course, Republicans have said the same thing. Is President Trump finally doing something that the Biden administration should have done?
He's finally doing something against China, dealing with China head on. Whether or not it's something that Biden or anybody else should have done or should be doing is an open question.
Okay, but is he doing too much? Is he doing too little? I mean, is he going to solve the problem?
It depends which problem you're talking about. If it's a problem about global trade, I think American voters, the Americans are going to feel it in the pocketbook pretty quickly, pretty harshly. And I think increasingly foreign countries are starting to do deals with China because frankly it's a more reliable trading partner because they know what tariffs are going to be from moment to moment. And here in the US, it's unclear what's going to happen in the long term.
Lance, let's look at the reaction to what's been happening in the markets. I mean, 2 weeks ago, this economy was, tugging along quite nicely. Inflation was coming down. Everyone looked at America as the envy of the world. And you've had a week of absolute turmoil. Yes, the markets yelped with joy yesterday because of that pause on the tariffs, but we're back into pretty nasty red territory today. You haven't managed to reassure the markets.
Well, we had a phenomenal jobs report here in America last week. We had a report this morning showing that inflation was down in March as well. America's economy is strong. There's no question about that. China's economy is actually struggling, but America's economy is strong. Yes, Wall Street is freaking out a little bit, but I don't know that middle America, who has seen their towns decimated because of the trade imbalance with China, completely agrees with Wall Street.
But the big difference yesterday was that the bond markets, which is an indication of trust in America, basically freaked out, and that's why they changed their mind in that building down there. You had, Goldman Sachs saying we're already effectively in a recession. Eventually, what happens on Wall Street washes up on Main Street.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, look, there are going to be some adjustments along the way. There's no question about it. But if 75 plus countries are coming to the White House saying we're looking to make a trade deal, then I suspect we will see over the course of the next few months those imbalances with those countries worked out. And yes, will there be some bumps along the way? Absolutely. But let's remember, I go back to middle America out there who have seen bumps for the last 20 or 30 years as factories have closed and jobs have went overseas. That's what middle America's been dealing with.
To that point, Peter, I mean, these problems have been brewing for a very long time indeed. And again, successive administrations have promised that they would sort out the problems of the Rust Belt and bring those jobs back. And again, it's not happened. It didn't happen under your administration. It's not happening now.
Jobs were coming back. Manufacturing was coming back. And it is a tricky problem, right? Because you put on tariffs, that's effectively a tax on goods. So prices rise in the U.S. for American consumers. Nobody wants that, right? The bond market, I think, is the big talking point here, right? The Democratic consultant James Carville famously said when he was a kid, he wanted to be reincarnated as the president. Now he wants to be reincarnated as the bond market because that's where the power really is. I think there's another story, though, here, and that's not just about the economy, but do the American people and do people globally see this as an administration that's on top of its game, that knows what it's doing? And you look at workers who are protecting America's nuclear facilities who were fired and then unfired, right? They fired the guy who had the key to the restroom at a national park. Another story is, I think world leaders and the American voter might be saying, I like kind of some of what's going on, but I'm just not sure these guys are up to the task.
I mean, that's the real issue here, isn't it? That you've lost trust, or rather the world has lost trust in America's institutions, in America's markets, in the ability of this country to do the right thing at the right time. And, when Trump basically puts those tariffs on pause for a bit, that's basically people saying, oh my God, he's not completely insane. That's not victory, is it?
Well, the president's not insane. I mean, look, I don't think that anybody's really lost trust. Look, we're in a bumpy period. There's no question. But to your point, the one that you raised initially, for 20-some years, everybody's talked about, we have a $300 billion trade imbalance with China. That's what America has. They have stolen $600 billion a year in intellectual property from America. And they have infiltrated our universities with Confucius Institutes. For 20-some years, administrations have talked about taking China head on. That's what this president is doing.
Yes, but are you doing the same thing that Donald Trump suggested we should do with COVID, which is to drink bleach, which could kill the virus and also kill the patient? Is that what he's just, what he suggested with these tariffs?
I think the only thing that was going to work in this instance to get this trade imbalance was a blunt force trauma and an instrument to come in and say, we need to reset. And that's why 75 countries are coming to make a deal, because remember, they need America more than America needs them.
Peter?
The global economy doesn't quite work that way. The markets are responding. People who keep track of this are responding. And I do really think it's a matter of trust. I talked to a foreign leader, a European leader, several weeks ago, who's here on a trade mission. And he said he'd rather do business with the U.S., shares American values, we're a big trading partner, but frankly, we're unreliable. He is asking me, what do I do? I'm going to China to make trade deals because I don't like their politics, I don't like their human rights records, but I know what they're going to do next. That concerns me as a citizen, that concerns me as a consumer.
Lance, at the end of the day, if this trade war is as bad as it looks, and these tariffs are unprecedented, and this is exactly what happens in trade wars, one side starts, the other side responds, and it gets worse and worse and worse. This will have an impact on the American economy and the world economy, won't it?
Well, I think in the interim, yes. I mean, we're seeing the Wall Street, again, I think there's bumps that are going to be worked out. But as these other countries come to America, yes, absolutely.
This is an abyss potentially.
Yeah, I mean, there are bumps along the way, but that's what happens when you have massive trade imbalances and you're trying to correct what's been, going wrong for America. And that's what President Trump is trying to do, is correct these trade imbalances. That's why 75 plus countries are coming to the White House to try to renegotiate. And so, look, are we going to go at it with China? Yeah, but I mean, we have a $300 billion trade imbalance. We need to correct that.
Peter, when they talk about renegotiation, in a best case scenario, if you were in charge, what would you hope for? Because the status quo, as it was before, wasn't perfect either. So what would you do?
I'm not a trade expert. I'm a politics guy, and I'm a college professor. I think what I try to do is shore up trust in American institutions, in the press, in the judiciary, and frankly in each other, because with a good, trusting politics, we can solve anything. Division just tears us all down.
But talking politics, it's fascinating. We'll hear from a pollster later on that actually, despite the turmoil of the last week, it hasn't impacted that much on President Trump's approval rating.
Maybe. It depends if you dive into the numbers. The American people, and especially Republicans, really tend to like what he's doing on immigration. Increasing skepticism on the economy. Among hardcore supporters are always going to love Trump. Some are always going to hate him. But I think there's increasing skepticism among some voters saying, wait, I didn't know you meant me. I didn't know that this would affect me.
Final question to both of you, a brief one if I may. President Trump is behaving like a wannabe monarch. Oddly enough, in the year when you're celebrating 250 years of revolution against the British monarchy. And Congress should be doing its job and they're not. Right? So what's going on there?
Congress is doing its job.
Not really.
Maybe you don't like the outcome of what
he governs by presidential decree.
Let's remember, Republicans won the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I think.
But he doesn't go to Congress. He does everything by signing a last bit of paper.
He has executive authority that he uses, and if Congress felt strongly enough, I'm sure they would step in and do something.
Peter, where are the Democrats here?
No, the Democrats are making a lot of noise. The question is where the Republicans. And I think you're absolutely right. Congress is doing what Congress can do, which is agree or disagree. Republicans in Congress have to be more afraid to agree with Trump than to oppose him. Right now they're afraid of opposing him, so they're going along with it. The moment they feel the heat, and the Speaker's majority can comfortably fit in a Costco sauna. He can't afford to lose many votes.
Okay, good thought to end on. Interesting image. Peter Loge and Lance Trover, thank you very much to both of you. The continuing turmoil over Donald Trump's tariffs and China facing the full force of the White House's fury with a 145% tariff on Chinese imports to the United States. That's left millions of workers and consumers facing a new uncertainty. But as Jane Deeth reports, the message from the party and state media is that China will emerge the winner.
A
newsreader on state television announcing China's retaliatory move in the tit-for-tat trade war, an 84% levy on US goods. Despite being hit with the toughest of all Trump's tariffs, the message in China seems to be, show no sign of weakness. The Foreign Affairs spokesperson Mao Ning used Elon Musk's X to make the point that the Chinese don't back down, with a video of Chairman Mao vowing to triumph against America in the Korean War. On the socials of this state news channel, a journalist tells viewers not to believe the talk of a tariff apocalypse.
China makes things. It's the only country in the world with industries across all categories in the UN industrial classification. That affords China the ability to produce nearly everything domestically, if necessary, without having to rely on imports.
But in the eastern city of Yiwu, wholesalers who export everything from tights to party poppers are not feeling so relaxed about massive US tariffs.
We are definitely worried that it will be harder and harder to do business. Our clients will have no profit to make, and neither will we.
The problem is, will tariffs work? Can the US produce what China or Yiwu is producing now? Ordinary people are the ones who'll get hurt the most by the tariffs.
Meanwhile, some try to make light of the heavy tariffs. This AI-generated video puts the US President, Elon Musk and J.D. Vance in the shoes of Chinese factory workers and asks whether Americans really want to produce goods currently made in China.
And the view from here. James Johnson is a political advisor and pollster. I spoke to him a little while ago and began by asking him if all that's happened in the White House in the last week and the criticism of it has had any impact at all on President Trump's approval ratings.
Not much that we've seen. So we did a poll last week in the midst of tariff week, and we found that Donald Trump's approval was actually up.
Up?
53% approve, 47% disapprove.
Yeah.
Now that moves around, it moves around the 50% mark. That's quite good for Trump historically. He's not always had positive approval ratings. Now, it might have taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of days. We'll see what the polls say over the next week or so, but I don't expect it to have had a dramatic impact.
And what were people telling you in these polls that they liked that he was doing correctly?
So when we ask people what they liked about Donald Trump's record so far, they say the pace. They say he's moving fast and he's doing what he said he'd do. That's the thing that comes across. They feel that it's promises made and promises kept. Now, I've also been doing interviews with voters around some of the swing states. I was in Nevada last week interviewing swing voters in Vegas, a place that went red for the first time in Nevada for a long time. Now, voters there were telling me that even if the economy does worsen, or even if costs go up, or even if this economic chaos causes problems, they are not going to blame the president. They are looking instead at unions, they're looking instead at judges, they're looking instead at other members of the Trump administration. Elon Musk is another one in their crosshairs. The loyalty to Trump is really, really significant amongst his voters.
Even if, I mean, we don't know what would have happened had the tariffs stayed as they were just 24 hours ago. But let's say things end up getting a bit wobbly. Even today, the markets were not great, to be honest. If that goes further down, in the wrong direction, will there be an impact then on Trump?
So I think for Donald Trump, he's relatively cloistered because of that loyalty that he has amongst his voters. There is something interesting, though, is that his voters aren't necessarily all going to go and vote in 2026. In 2026, midterm elections that will determine the control of the House and the Senate, those elections do not get as many people coming out to vote. Now, those people who are a bit more engaged who vote in those elections, they could be influenced by this.
Is he more popular than his party, the Republican Party?
He is more popular than the Republican Party, absolutely. Yeah.
There are some polls that indicate that Americans don't like what he's doing specifically on the economy. And of course, they elected him in order to fix the economy and fix inflation and so on. But that's not what you're finding in your polls.
So there's definitely hesitation, for sure, about tariffs, and there's definitely hesitation about inflation and the economy, but they feel that they're going to give him time to turn it around, and that's where I think there's a limited impact. The other thing that's happening in the approval ratings is that it's not all the economy, remember. The border, huge issue at the election, and people feel that Donald Trump's record on the border has been very, very strong indeed. We saw 10% of people before his inauguration saying the border situation was going well. It's now 50%. So that's a huge turnaround in terms of American opinion, which is generally quite polarised. So that positive sentiment on the border is offsetting some of the negative sentiment on the economy.
In the UK and elsewhere, we care a lot about foreign policy, the foreign policy coming out of this White House on Ukraine and the Middle East. Do American voters care about that?
American voters don't care. That is the thing I have been struck by again and again in the interviews that I've been doing. There's a widespread assumption amongst lots of swing voters that America is actually in Ukraine, because there's not much, there's not much sort of close following of what's exactly going on. And the view is that America shouldn't be funding Ukraine, America shouldn't be funding foreign issues abroad. That can backfire on Trump too. They also don't like the Canada 51st state or the Greenland stuff either.
Right.
They don't.
That's interesting. Yeah.
American expansionism.
That's going too far.
It's going too far. American expansionism is not in vogue. But that also means they don't want to see an interventionist America in China, Russia, wherever it might be either.
James Johnson, thanks very much.
Thank you.